Are there any other general questions you came up with while playing around with the trench? Yes?
Yeah, I just couldn't find the way, or I didn't remember the way to put the points in the findings.
Okay.
Fines, I couldn't remember the fines as well.
In fines. Okay, so the basic idea is we can just make a new thing here. If you make a find, you'll get this add point section. And if you click on that add points, now you're in this point editor, and you can either connect to a total station, this green button here, or you can just double tap on the right and it will make a point for you wherever you want.
The points don't have an elevation though.
The points do not have an elevation. Why?
Because we don't have a total station.
Yeah, because iDig has no idea how high that point is. So when you take a point with the total station, you're going to have an elevation. But if you do one of these touch points, there's a couple different aspects to these touch points. The first thing is you can hold down on them, and you get this crosshair where you can put the point wherever you want it to go. So you can move the point around if it's a touch point, if you touched it. If it comes from a total station, it won't let you do that. So you can't alter the total station points. But if you touch, then you can create these points wherever you want and put them wherever you want. And it will change the dimensions here. But you'll notice each one of them has 0, 0 for the elevation, because it doesn't know what that elevation is when you touch the point out.
About the points,
Yeah.
in general, is there any undo button in this one? Because, for example, I was taking the points and I accidentally tried to close, a shape, and I clicked next to, let's say,
Next to
0.1,
one or something like that?
and accidentally many times touched 0.1 2 times, so it deletes it.
Okay. Yeah, there's no undo. You can delete the points and remake them, but there's no undo in here. So the best you can do is just delete these
Okay,
and go from there and start over.
and do it again. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes?
Once you have made like your cross section and you want to add a new find, how do you do that? The way that you put your find, is it the same way? Because how does the shape of a diamond appear?
The shape of a diamond appears because that's the shape that goes with fines. So the fine type will be associated with just a single point usually.
Yes, that's why.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter if there's 4 points here defining the find. When it actually draws it, it's just going to take the center point to draw the find.
So it might be in a different part of the room, but when you take it to when you make it with the iPad, it just goes to the center.
That's right, if there's multiple ones there. I'm saying that find came from somewhere inside that basket.
And when you take it with the total station, you can actually put it wherever.
It'll put it exactly where the point is. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's go through the settings here and look through the settings.
Can I ask something?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so could you explain once more the pens, but not the Talcat pen and the Camp pen, the other ones?
Just the normal pencil?
Just the normal ones?
Okay, so the normal pencil basically has a couple uses. If you tap it, the pencil goes red. Now I can draw anywhere on the screen. Okay, if you select an area, you circle an area, it's going to filter it down to just the things in that area.
Okay.
And there were 2 types of that. If you go clockwise or right, it's going to be a solid line, and it's only the things that are actually inside that area.
Okay.
If you go to the left, counterclockwise, it'll make a dash shape thing, which will include anything that somehow touches that area.
Okay, great.
Otherwise, it has to be completely inside. If it's not completely inside, like over here, it won't get selected.
Great, thank you.
But if I go the other way, now anything touching that will get in there.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, so settings. The first thing in the settings is the trench list. So this is a list of all the trenches that are on my iPad, or all the ones that are not. You can edit these, and you can add new trenches, delete trenches, and so forth. The total station menu, there'll be multiple total stations usually out on the site, and this lets you select which one you want to connect to. There's a little Raspberry Pi, the Pi Snap they call it, which is connected to the total stations. That makes a little Wi-Fi network that you can then connect to. I think it's connected to the main Wi-Fi network on the site. But just to show you how to do that, if you go to hit the button to go to your main apps page, and then go to the settings. If you go to the settings at the very top, there's a Wi-Fi network, and you guys should all be on Agora Amphoras. Okay, the second thing we're going to do while we're here in the settings is change the name. So the iPad will appear on the network to have a name, and you can set that if you go into the general settings here, and you go about, very top one, name, and then change that to your first name. So this will identify the iPad on the network, and when someone syncs with you, they'll see your name, the name of the iPad that it uses. Okay, so everyone done that? Okay. So then we can go back to iDig. So we have the trench list, we have the total station list, the grid. If you turn on the show grid, it's going to turn on this dynamic grid on your plan. So this grid can also be turned on and off just by holding down off, so you're not touching anything. And if you hold down, that'll toggle the grid on and off. And this is useful sometimes when you're trying to go into an area and do some kind of spot measurements on things. So that's the grid button. The thumbnail button, this controls whether or not you see the thumbnails on the left. So if I turn the show thumbnails off on the left here, I'm only going to get a list of the items. The way this works is if I turn the thumbnails on, it'll look at all the photographs that are connected to each thing, and it'll either pull out the first one it finds and use that as a thumbnail for that particular item, or if you go to a image, let's say we want to set let's say we want to set this one as our thumbnail. You can go find one of these images. You can just, okay, so let's say I want to make this photograph my thumbnail. So the way this works is there's a rating field in the photographs, and if I give this a rating of 5, say, this particular photograph, now when I go back to the basket, it'll have that photo as its thumbnail, its first one. So there is a way you can control which photograph shows up as your thumbnail by changing the rating on it. But in general, it's just mainly for a visual ID, because as you're working, sometimes it's easier than having just a list of items to see the little thumbnails associated with each one, or setting it so that you know which one it is as you're working. So that's the thumbnail button. Color items by. We've looked at this. You can either color the items by the type, the status, the phase, which is the chronology field, or graphite, no color at all. High resolution. Basically, if high resolution is off, what it's doing is it's showing these as pure rasters, which is faster and less memory intensive, but you can see they're kind of blurry when you zoom in. If you change this to high resolution, it will show these in vector format, so they're a lot more crisp.
So vector, you can come up with them if you were to actually.
If you wanted to, yeah. So originally with Apple's, the way they did their implementation, this vector mode was a bit unstable. It hasn't crashed for a few years, so I'll probably take that unstable marker off there. I haven't seen it crash for a long time. So originally there were some issues with Apple's framework, but it seems to be solved now.
Is
that translate, if you import it into ArcGIS or something like that, into polygons?
Yeah,
Device,
if you import it into like a GIS program, it's going to import the raw point data. So if you took the point data as polygons, it'll come in as a polygon.
Gotcha.
The next two sections, trench mates, this is the thing you use to sync with other iPads. The last section we talked about very briefly. This is a connection, an address, and a username and a password to connect to a server that has all the previous season's excavation data in it. That should already be filled in for you. This is specific to the Agora. We're currently working on a server version of iDig so that other excavations can use this for their previous excavation data too. But for right now, it's just working with the American School website. So the Trenchmate section, if you turn Trenchmates on, you're going to get a new button in the right top here. And if you touch this button, it's going to show you a list of all the other iPads it sees on the network. Okay, and these are based on the names that you just gave them. And so this is how you sync with another iPad. I'm going to leave the conflict resolution suggestions off. The shared secret is just some kind of simple security to make sure that you're syncing with the right people. So replace that with, let's say, A, B, C, all lowercase. So we all have the same shared secret. So in order to talk to another iPad, you have to be on the same Wi-Fi network, and you need to have the same shared secret. So who would like to be the guinea pig with their trench? Who has a nice trench that we'd like to see so we can practice some syncing here? Anyone want to volunteer? Orestes. Okay. So now we can see Orestes' pad. So let's see the name of your trench, Orestes. What is the name? Orestes Trench. Okay. So what I'm going to try to do here, in order to sync with someone else, you have to have the exact same name as the trench. I'm going to edit my trenches. I'm going to make a new trench. And I'm going to title it exactly the same as Orestes Trench. Orestes Trench. Okay. So now I have this blank trench, nothing inside of it. I'm going to select Orestes from the sync menu here, and that's going to connect to Orestes' trench and pull over a copy of his trench to my iPad. So now I'm looking at all the things that are different from my iPad and Orestes. So there's a find, there's some baskets and things like that. And normally I have to go through and select these things to say what I want to do with them. This is where the conflict resolution suggestions come in. If I turn that on, conflict resolution suggestions, that's going to suggest to me what is probably the most likely thing I want to do, in this case, I want to add all these new items that are in Orestes' trench. Okay? So I'll save that, and then my light goes green. So I can sync with Orestes, and it's fine. It's green now. So now, Orestes, I want you to try to sync with me back. So you'll hit the sync button, and you'll select Bruce. So that'll sync back. That'll pull a copy of my trench over, and now we're both green. Okay, which means as far as we're concerned, I can keep hitting Orestes, he can keep hitting me. And we're both green, which means we both have basically the same trench. So now what happens if we start changing things? So what happens, let's say, if I go into basket 2, and on the identifier right here, I put something like big basket. Okay, so now sync with me again, Orestes. So he's going to get, now you can open those up, you can click on those lines and it will open it up and it will show you what has changed. In this case, I added the big basket, so you can go ahead and hit save. Now what happens if Orestes makes a change? So go back to your the beginning there. Okay, Yes, question.
From my understanding, it's like when you try to sync with somebody, it's like kind of accepting every time the changes that they make.
Exactly.
But isn't the point of syncing like doing this without asking?
Yeah, when I'm pulling from him, I'm not asking him any questions because it goes back to that principle of this is my iPad, my data. I only have to vet the things that come in to me. So for example, let's do a case where we disagree. So Rusty's go into one of your baskets and add something. Just pick any basket and then go inside of it. Oh, no, you hit new basket. Hit cancel there.
Oh, I changed the type. That's how I add the comment.
Ah, okay. But I mean, go into one of your existing baskets. Just go back. Hit cancel. Yeah, go into one of your existing ones.
So basketball.
There you go. Go inside that, and then change. Let's say the identifier on it. If you go to the identifier field there at the top,
Oh,
and then type something in there.
right. What should I?
Whatever you want.
Okay.
Okay. Dirty. All right. Dirty basket. Okay. Okay. So now, if I sync with the resties, let's say it comes in and it says, Orestes has numbered this dirty basket. Now, what happens if I say, I don't want his change, I'm going to keep it the way I have it myself, okay? And now, when I sync with Orestes, I've looked at his change, and I've kind of gone ahead of it. So now if I sync with him, iDig's telling me, okay, you're basically the same as his from your perspective. But if he tries to sync with me, now it's going to say, open that up again. Open those two lines up so you can see inside them. So this is going to say, I got rid of his dirty basket one. Now what happens if he says, I don't agree with that, I want to keep my dirty basket. So select the second one there, Orestes.
This one.
Yep, and unselect the top one. Okay, and then hit save. Okay, so now when he syncs with me, his will be green. If I sync with him, it's going to come back to me, and it's going to say, no, he still insists on that. So the whole idea is that iDig is basically peer-to-peer. And everything on my iPad's mine, and I have to vet everything that comes in. If someone rejects my change, it's going to ping-pong it back to me.
So
There's no master version. It'll just ping-pong it back until Orestes and I are forced to get together and decide what this means.
The iPads are debating.
They're debating. So if I go in, let's say, let's go down to description and do it. Because I think with some of these fields, like the identifier, it's only gonna let you have one. But if you have something like a description field, and I put in, go ahead in your description field and type something in there on that basket, your dirty basket.
So you can change his.
You can either double tap it or click on the right there. So go to the description field
Yeah, and add something.
and type like small basket or something like that. Okay, so now I'm going to sync with Orestes. And it's going to say, I have small basket, Orestes has, or I have big basket, he has small basket. I'm going to merge these two together. And now if I go in there, what you'll notice is it's added this snip line where it has the one side with the field that they have, and then underneath it a side with yours. If he syncs with me right now, he'll get that same snip there. It'll just stay there. It's just text. So the idea is you'll delete this and decide which parts from each thing you want. So I'm just going to go with small. And now if Orestes syncs with me,
Yeah.
go back in now. Yeah, so you have that now. If you go back and sync with me again, now it's going to tell you that I've gotten rid of that and edited it down. So hit save. and then we sync with each other, and now we're basically both the same, we're both green. As long as you're syncing with another iPad and they sync back and you're both green, you know your data is going to be the same at that point. Okay, questions?
Okay, the merging part was done and available only when you selected both the options.
That's right. You're saying, I want both of them.
Okay.
So it'll turn red, and it'll also give you a pop-up saying you're going to have to fix this manually yourself afterwards.
Okay.
In terms of points, and particularly those upon which you open a basket, so it defines it in at least two-dimensional and three-dimensional
Okay.
space, can you be in conflict with that?
The polygons will come in as different. Basically, with the points, it'll do it on a basis on a polygon. So it'll just say he's got an extra polygon, and that'll come in as an extra one, and then you'll have to sort out which ones you want. Yeah. So we're all good on syncing?
So in principle, you could be in conflict with two different areas within the
You could be in conflict with a bunch of different people, right? And normally what happens is when a good thing to keep in mind, we'll talk about this more later when we talk about configuring iDig, but in general, there seems to be a correlation between physical work areas and types. So what that means is, imagine someone's out in the field and they're working on a context and they're writing their description up for that context in the field. Someone else is at pottery washing and they're writing descriptions of the content of that basket. Now these two contexts have to at some point come together and sync. And any place you have that where people are editing a record in different physical locations, that record will have to come together and be resolved at some point in time. A lot of times when you're designing the recording systems for excavations, if you create a different type for the physical areas, so in other words, you could have something like a pottery washing type. That'll let the person at pottery washing edit that record as much as they want, and then it's just related with the relationship to the basket, so that when they're out in the field entering the context, now they're two separate records only joined by a relationship. And that's a lot easier to sync together at the end of the day than having one record where multiple fields are being edited in multiple places. So from a recording system perspective, when you're trying to design these things, you want to think a lot about where activity is taking place in physical areas and potentially make new types for those areas so that you don't have this problem of trying to sync a lot of this data together at the end of the day.
Also, I have two questions. It seems like you have to constantly sync again and again because, you know, as the day advances and the season advances, many changes are done. Is there any automatic way to do this, like every, I don't know, 20 minutes to pop up a notification?
No, there's no automatic way now. We're working on a kind of a central server idea for some big excavations that have, like at Keros and the Swiss, they'll have up to 10 iPads in a trench, and it gets a little bit cumbersome there. So we're working on a non-peer-to-peer solution. When you do have a central server, you can sync against a central server to make it easier. But for now, it's still all peer-to-peer, because you might be in the middle of nowhere with no connection, and the only thing you have is a local Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Yes.
If you want to sync with more than one person,
Right.
and what do you have to do? Like
You
have
just select their iPad from the menu.
Yeah, but
So
do
as long as they have the same trench, so if for example I try to sync with Orestes, if I make a trench like ABC, which Orestes doesn't have, and I try to sync with him, it's going to give me this pop-up because there's a lot of things that can go wrong at this stage. You might both, for example, let's see what this says. Make sure all trench mates are connected to the same network. So you got to be on the same Wi-Fi network so they can see each other. They have trench mates turned on. If someone has trench mates turned off, they won't listen for any other iPads to connect to them. They're using the same shared secret. That might be different. And you have to have the trench with the exact same name as the one you're dealing with. So all those things can go wrong if you're trying to sync with someone. And so this will give you a checklist of things to check if it's not working, if it's not seeing them.
But but the more people, the more changes like you have to accept.
That's right, and you think of it in terms of time. So, you're synchronized at one moment in time at the beginning of the day. As everyone works, you slowly diverge. The further you diverge, the more pain that you're going to experience when you try to synchronize. So a lot of times, the faster you're syncing, and out in the trench, they're usually syncing, constantly. Take a basket, sync it over, sync, sync, sync. And it's a lot easier that way. If you diverge too far, then you have a lot of conflicts you might have to resolve at the end. So the faster you sync, usually the less painful it is.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
So it's not like you make the changes for your basket, for your trends, but others also check it. But do they have to check it?
They don't have to. It's up to, it's up to, most of the supervisors, it depends on how much they trust their assistants and things. If their assistants are entering data, a lot of times the supervisors will at least want to vet and see what they wrote and make sure it's okay before they accept it, or they might ping it back to the other one and say, I don't do it again.
Supervisor to assistant, I can understand, but supervisor to supervisor.
They don't usually sync because it's usually the supervisors in charge of one trench, and they don't really care what's going on in the other trenches. They can if they want. What I usually do is I just keep every trench on my iPad and go around and sync with everyone, and I keep a backup that way, another backup through the course of the season. So I don't actually make changes, I just pull whatever changes they make, and it makes it very easy to keep a backup copy on, let's say, one iPad, and that's commonly done too. Yeah.
Is there a plan for the whole excavation, or is it like divided into trenches?
It's usually divided up into trenches. You want as close as you can to your own area. I mean, you can have bigger plans. Like I think in this demo, I have this large photo which covers that whole North BZ area. But the bigger your plan is, the less you're going to be able to zoom in and see a lot of detail. So usually people will just want a plan covering the area they're excavating. Okay? All right, so let's look at the iDig file system. Yesterday we looked at all the things, say, from the iDig perspective. iDig, if you go to the Files app on your iPad and you hit On My iPad on the left there, you'll see an iDig folder. So iDig basically keeps all of its data in this publicly accessible folder. So if you're on your iPad, you can go in, not publicly in the sense of off your iPad, but in the sense of like you can see as a user all the data that iDig has. There's a couple different ways to access this folder. The first one is with the Files app on the iPad. And the way Apple is going is it's kind of like, for example, I can open up the Numbers app, and the Numbers app is going to give me the same kind of file hierarchy, where the Numbers app mainly just works with spreadsheets. So in this case, when I open it up in Numbers, it's not going to let me do anything with those files because it doesn't recognize it.
Sorry, can you
Yeah.
repeat again, where do we find
The Files app should just be on your iPad. You can search, you can go hit the button.
Okay,
Yeah, it's one of those main apps there.
sorry.
Hit the button and then you can go left and right. So on your screen, you can go left and right to go through your apps this way. It should be one of the apps there on your screen. It should be a blue folder looking thing.
Yeah.
Okay?
Then, thank you, sorry.
Yeah, and so most of the apps on the iPad kind of have this idea that I'll open the app up and I'll look at the file structure and I can open up the files that way. The Files app will let you open up any one of these files. You can share it, you can delete it, you can do all kinds of things with it. The two other ways from a Mac computer, what you can do is the Finder has, if you plug your iPad into your computer on a Mac, the Finder will let you select your iPad in just a browser in one of the main windows, and then you'll get all this information about your iPad. One of them will be Files, and this will show you that directory as well. So I can open up the iDig folder here, and I can see all the items that are inside that folder. The files, say the desktop Finder interface for accessing this file. It doesn't really let you go inside the folders. You can drag everything out to your desktop and move things around that way. There's another program we've been using called iMazing, and this program this has a free version you can download. This lets you browse your iPhone, iPad, any connected device as well. So I can log into my iPad and I can see all these different files, and I can also go inside the folders and see what's inside the folders. iMazing is an application you can download from the internet. There's a site. If you go to the site, there's a bunch of different programs that are on the internet that let you browse your iPhone or iPad. Apple they have the built-in Finder thing. When I'm in the Apple Finder, I can go and I can see the files that are on my iPhone or my iPad. But it's a little bit course. Like I said, you can't go inside folders. I can drag these over, so I can take this ABC trench and drag it over to my desktop, and it's going to make a copy of it on my computer. That's one way you can get files in and out of this folder. But sometimes I just find it easier to either use iMazing or the Files app on the device. So let's have a look at the file system here. This is iDig's file system where it stores all of its files. The first thing you'll notice are these PKG files. These are the trench files. So there'll be a PKG file for every trench that you see listed on your iPad. The second thing you'll notice are these JSON files. There's one main preferences for iDig. It's called preferences.json. We will spend the Friday, the last day, looking at this file in detail. This file defines all the types and all the fields that iDig will use. So this is the generic one, this preferences.json, and this is used, right now it's just the ag raw preferences. You can also make a copy of that preferences file and edit it. And if you title that the same name as one of your trenches, it's going to try to use that preferences file for that trench. So let's look at Poros here, for example. Poros has its own poros.json file, its configuration file, and it's got a trench file. So if I go into Poros on the iPad, you can see that Poros has dives, artifacts, events, images, and plans. Okay, so it's getting this definition from that configuration file. If I go into the iDig folder, let's say, and I rename this poros.json file, okay, now it no longer matches the trench file name. So when iDig goes to load this trench, now it reads the configuration as soon as you open the trench. So I'll go to another trench. I'll go back to Poros. Now it doesn't find the Poros specific configuration, so it doesn't know what these things are. It says they're untyped. These were the events and the dives, but there's no definition of these types in the default preferences.json file. So now it doesn't know what these types are, and it thinks these are finds, it thinks these are photos and plans and so forth.
So the PKG file is essentially pointers.
The PKG file is the trench data itself. So that's like all the data you enter is in the PKG files. The .json file is the configuration that describes the types and fields inside. So if I go back, if I go back to Poros and I look at this, I rename it to poros.json. Did it rename it? Okay, and then I go back to my iPad. I switch out of this trench, go back into it so it loads the preferences. Now I've got my dives and my events and all these types back. Okay? So there is the trench files. There's an attachments folder. This folder stores every single image that's on the iPad. And so what iDig does when you take a photograph, it'll give it a name based on one of these universally unique IDs, UUIDs. And these all look like this. They have numbers and letters in them from A to F. And this is an identifier, an ID, that any device, whether it's your phone, iPad, whatever, it can create an ID that is, according to George, guaranteed to be unique across the entire universe. So this ID will never clash with another UUID created by another machine. And we do this because if you take images, you don't know what that other person's going to call the image. So if you use these unique IDs, you can be guaranteed that it's never going to clash with something someone else made on a different iPad. So every basket, every find, every item you make gets its own UUID. Every photo you take gets its own UUID. And that's how iDig makes sure that everything on your iPad is connected correctly without clashing with someone else's items as well. So all the photographs are in the attachment folder, as well as the plans. You'll see in here the plans. If you go down to the bottom, usually they're all labeled with a name or something like that. And this is to keep all the plans basically so they're the same from pad to pad. So anyone using the name of a plan called that, it should be the same on every single iPad that they're using. So that's the attachments folder. The cache folder is used by iDig just to keep low resolution graphics around so it's faster. That can be pretty much ignored. The history folder. The history folder keeps track of backups. So if you make changes to a trench, it'll make a backup file of that, and it will use curly braces to mark these. So that was done on Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it'll basically keep a week-long backup of your trench inside the history folder in case you delete something and then 2 days later you realize, crap, I shouldn't have done that. You can go back and rescue that. It also, you'll notice, there's also these square bracket trenches, and this is Orestes' trench. When I was syncing with Orestes, this is Orestes' trench from Orestes' iPad. If you get whenever you sync with someone, what it does is it copies their entire trench to your iPad, and then it looks at the differences between them so that you can resolve them. And when they sync back with you, it's going to take a full copy of your trench over to their iPad. And so if you're out on an excavation and you're syncing with multiple iPads, all of those iPads will have a copy of your data, which is another way to make sure that you're not going to lose something. So theoretically, I could lose my iPad today, get a brand new one tomorrow, type in all the trench names, go sync with someone, and I'm back to where I was before. Okay?
About the history part that you said before, how is it different from the trash can?
The trash can is actually inside your trench, and it's just a way of temporarily not deleting items. The history is for whole trenches,
Okay.
and the trash can is for individual items.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So that's the history folder. The inbox shows up sometimes if someone sends you an email or something, and you want to you open up the email and you want to have an image, and you share that image with iDig. It'll import it into iDig, and it ends up in the inbox for a little bit. So mainly, though, we have the trench names, the JSON preferences. There's also a plans folder. If you put plans in the plans folder, this is kind of just a convenient default place where you can put default plans. And then I go back to iDig and I say, I want to make a new trench. Let's call it A. If I have no plans and no items in a trench, there is this import plans option on the plans menu. That'll import any of the plans that exist inside that plans folder in iDig. So sometimes when you're working excavation, you can put your default plans in there, and whenever someone makes a new trench, they can just import them instead of copying and pasting them from another trench. That's just a convenience.
What's the file type for plans?
It just an image, basically. It can be a JPEG, TIFF, can be PNG. It recognizes any images. The last folder in here is called Web. And what this is it's a basic web HTML files for a web server. So what actually happens when I go into TrenchMates, let's go to another trench here, Beta Theta West 2013. When I turn on TrenchMates, you'll notice underneath here, it'll give you an address, a web address. It'll say, TrenchMate peer-to-peer syncing is now enabled. Raw trench data can be exported in tab delimited format at the following address. Use the shared secret as the password. So here it's giving me an address, HTTP 10.9.1.222.52888. So let's go to a web browser and let's type that address in, 221.52888. Okay, now it's going to ask me for the shared secret. I'm going to type in ABC and log in. And now I'm talking in a web browser on my computer or on any computer on the same network. I'm talking to this particular iDig application. So the way TrenchMates and the way syncing works is essentially iDig starts up a web server inside, and then people who are on the same network can talk to that web server and say, give me this trench. How many trenches do you have? I want a list of all these objects. So this is kind of a lower level interface into iDig that people can use to basically pull the data out of an iPad whenever they want. Okay, so for example, there's some canned lists in here. These are useful for things like the FREA comes around and they say, I want a list of all the objects you found this year. You can set up default kind of templates that allow you to just get the fields you want from all these objects, print it out, give it to the FREA, and you're done. Things like that. And at the end of the season as well, people can use this to get the data out as well. So you can either export your data. If I go into iDig and I go into a trench like this, and I hit export trench from the action menu, that's going to create a folder with all the information from that trench in the iDig folder. So then if I go back to iMazing, and I refresh this, I think I want to refresh I don't think it'll do the whole thing. Now you'll notice that it's created this Beta Theta West exported folder. And inside this, it will have collected all the information from that trench in several different formats. Most of them are CSV files, which are just spreadsheets that can be pulled into other programs. It's got a copy of the photos that were in that trench and the plans that were used and so on and so forth. In the types folder are individual spreadsheets in several different formats that allow you to just import that data into other programs. So you can either export your data and then pull it off from here, or you can use the web interface to go in and pull the data out of iDig that way. So the thing to keep in mind is this folder of data, this iDig folder, this is all the data that iDig knows about, which means I can take that entire folder, I can drag it off onto a computer, and basically you're taking a snapshot of iDig at that moment. I can archive that, do whatever I want with it. I can restore all those files back before, and iDig thinks it's exactly like it was before. So by using this folder of data, you can copy it, you can archive it, you can do whatever you want with it, and restore iDig to a previous state just by copying that folder back and forth.